flavours in this, so a nice dessert wine will go well with it. And people traditionally do put port with blue cheese as well. Serving it with honey and walnuts are other great things to pair with blue cheeses. And if ever you were doing any cooking, I tend not to buy other people's cheeses, but if ever a recipe calls for a Stilton, then I would obviously use Brinkworth Blue instead. And what do you think of that cheese, guys? Let's see some feedback from you in the chat, please. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the Brinkworth Blue and how you think it tastes. This is ripened for 6 weeks. It's like Shane, I can read your mind. This cheese is ripened for 6 weeks. We can keep it for 2 or 3 months. So I don't worry about overproducing it too much. And I can rush it through at 5 weeks if it's Christmas time and everybody wants blue cheese. Gary says that Brinkworth Blue is bloody marvellous. And Donald says, very mild, it's lovely. And Gary's, oh, there's another one. Oh, Sophie says she loves it. And Helen says, yummy honey flavours. I agree with you, Helen. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, and there's some of my Milk Crown customers are here as well. So there are some lucky people that live locally that get to have our produce delivered to them every Thursday and Friday. Thank you so much. Well, I'm really looking forward to tasting the other 2 cheeses with you. So if you do start tucking into those while you're watching the film that's coming up, that's fine, but save a little bit and we'll taste some together later on. Thank you so much.
Just checking this field of einkorn, ancient einkorn grain, to see if it is ready for harvest. Einkorn is a very ancient grain grown by Stone Age man, and we have a field of it here at Dove's Farm. Charred einkorn seeds have been found in a Stone Age settlement, Hill Fort, only 8 miles from here at Dove's Farm in England. We're just testing the einkorn for ripeness, ready for harvest. I'm taking the grain, I'm getting it out of the little husk, and then I'm biting it. And it goes from the milky stage, the cheesy stage, to the harvestable stage, which is hard. But this bit, I'd say, is still at the cheesy stage. Inside each spikelet is a grain, so this has to be dehulled. Unlike modern wheat, it doesn't thresh out as a naked grain. So it comes like this and has to be dehulled before it can be milled into flour. In the dehulling process, you lose about 40% of the weight, and it is quite a complicated process. So that's why it fell out of favour. It's late August. This was planted in April. It's a spring crop, and we've had quite a lot of rain on it, but today's a lovely sunny day, and we think that it is ready for harvest. It's nice and dry, and the combine will do a good job on it. Finished harvesting the einkorn, and the straw from the einkorn was chopped by the combine and put back in the ground for fertility. We then disked the ground incorporate the straw and stubble, and they will then rot in the ground. And now we're going to leave it for the winter. The sheep will come on here, it will green up, some of the weed seeds will germinate, and the sheep will eat those, and then we will plant a crop in the spring.
Thanks for sharing that, Phil. That was lovely. Did you spot in the video as well? There were some biscuits made with the Einkorn flour, and next to it was some hard blue cheese. Claire's nodding like that was deliberate. Because we were looking at a lot about the history of the Einkorn flour there, I thought I would think about the history of cheese now, and also the next cheese we're going to look at is my cheese, which has the most heritage, which is Wiltshire loaf. So that's the hard yellow cheese. That's the next one that you need to get ready. Oh, Claire's having a good sniff of the cheese already. That's okay. You can get all your fancy words ready to describe the cheese. It's a bit like wine tasting. You can be just as poncy about cheese as you can about wine. We think that cheese making started about 6,000 or 7,000 BC in Iraq. There seems to be a lot of foods that came out of that area, and the milk that would have been used would have been cow and goat. In about 100 BC, skin bags or animal stomach bags were used to transport milk around, and that rennet and the heat that would have caused the milk to coagulate, and you would have ended up at the end of your journey after carrying your milk around, you would have had a nice sweet drink in the way, and the milk would have coagulated something good to eat as well. There was also a parallel development of other fermented milks like yogurt, laban, and kefir. We now make kefir here at Brinkworth Dairy as well. And there's all different sorts of milks that you can make cheese from, and in different areas, so many different cheeses have been developed. The climate, the terrain, the animals, the flavor preferences are all going to affect what kinds of cheeses were made. Lots of the knowledge that we have is passed on from mother to daughter and not written down. So we don't really have that kind of evidence. And a lot of our evidence for cheese making history comes from religious orders, from monasteries where these things were recorded. And locally for us here in Wiltshire, Laycock Abbey, a National Trust property, is close to us. And in the 15th century, the cheese Wiltshire loaf was recorded as being made there. In the time of Elizabeth I here in Wiltshire, we had in the south, we've got very chalky downs, and in the north, we have clay. Now the clay makes lush grass, which is great for the cows to graze on, and they make great milk, which in turn makes fantastic cheese. So we have the Wiltshire as a county of contrasts, with the cheese making in the north and the chalk downs in the south. And it's where the phrase chalk and cheese comes from. William Marshall in 1796 wrote about agricultural practices throughout the UK, and of Wiltshire he described as their cheese making that they had the best practice in the kingdom at this day, however destitute of principles. Now I presume Marshall is referring to principles in cheese making rather than the wanton lusty dairymaids lacking in principles. It was things like having an intuitive idea about how to do things rather than having a scientific approach to things. In the 18th century, there would have been large herds of longhorn cattle, and in the time of Jane Austen, Wiltshire loaf was mentioned in 2 of Jane Austen's novels. Mr. Elton served Wiltshire loaf to show how affluent he was, and also Emma, the rebel, who should have been eating soft cheese like a lady, instead chose to eat Wiltshire loaf. What a rebel. There are many reasons why regional cheese making might have died out. Wiltshire did have an excellent reputation for cheese making, but to make Wiltshire loaf, it is very labor intensive. We have an hour and a half of hand stirring, very delicately moving the curds, which I think helps to make the cheese very creamy, but it means that the cheese is not very suited to factory work. And when practices started to change and labor started to move away from the land in the 1840s, there was less labor available to be doing this hard work of cheese making. In 1875, the Aylesbury Dairy set up in Swindon, and the cheddar cheese making process was much more suitable to factory making methods rather than the delicate Wiltshire loaf. There was a shortage of labor, and the Somerset School of Cheesemaking was set up in 1890, and that heavily promoted those scientific processes in cheesemaking, like using a thermometer to take the temperature rather than using your elbow. But it promoted cheddar cheesemaking at the expense of many other cheeses. And so the regional cheeses started to die out. I think the real reason why the many regional cheeses died out would have been World War rationing, and when people could only buy a few ounces of cheese a week, then there wasn't the market to be making cheeses, as well as perhaps the Milk Marketing Board. When you had a guaranteed source of a guaranteed outlet of someone to buy your milk, why would you bother to do all that hard work of making cheese? We need to taste this wonderful cheese now, so we'll have a look at it, and it does have a little bit of a rind here, a little bit of white mold here, and this is probably picked up a little bit of the geotrichum mold that comes from the next cheese we're going to taste, the Avery. It is challenging making lots of different cheeses all in the same room. And then we've got, see that it's more intense, darker color, just closer to the rind and much paler towards the center. We give the cheese a squeeze. It's not quite as hard as a cheddar cheese. And squeezing it into a paste. And now we can have a sniff of this cheese. Yeah, not too strong, creamy, mild and buttery. I kind of think of chamomile and daisy flavors coming from this one. We put it into our mouth. Oh yeah, citrus, I get that. Maybe yogurt-like with that, yeah, that sharpness flavor coming through. Yeah, do suggest your words to describe this. That's very helpful. And lovely. And this cheese has got the greatest honor, an award that any of our cheeses have been awarded. Yes, white flowers, chamomile, daisies, get that coming through. That's right, Shane. Buttery from Howard. Feta, not as salty as a feta, but maybe a similar texture. So I had a phone call from the lady who runs the British Cheese Awards, and she rang me up one evening and she said, "Are you coming to the British Cheese Awards ceremony this evening?" And I said no, and she rephrased. She said, "You are coming to the British Cheese Awards ceremony this evening." So me and Mum went along to a tent in Oxfordshire, and we were thrilled when Wiltshire Loaf won Best Other Territorial Cheese category. So a territorial cheese is a cheese that's named after its territory, like Cheshire and Derbyshire and Cheddar. Of course, in the olden days, the agricultural shows would have had a category for Wiltshire Loaf cheese, but now I'm the only maker. It wouldn't be fair to have that category. So instead, Wiltshire Loaf goes into the other territorial category, which we won. We got a gold for, so I was really excited about that. And then all of the winners from all the different territorial cheeses compete against each other. And I was really excited that that year Wiltshire Loaf won Best Territorial Cheese at the British Cheese Awards. I was so excited. There was this is very exciting and live. My milk delivering lady has just finished her round in this awful weather. Thank you, Lynn. And she's been delivering milk to everybody. So for some of you that are tasting cheeses, your milk has just been delivered. And so it won Best Territorial Cheese at the British Cheese Awards. And it was really exciting, and it enabled me to be able to approach other wholesalers that had been quite dismissive of me before. To make this cheese, it's similar to the Brinkworth Blue. We pasteurize, add starter, add rennet, lots of stirring, cheddaring, which is lifting up the curds and stacking them on top of each other to drive out the whey. We mill the curd with a curd peg mill, just the same as my great-grandfather would have done when he was here on this farm. And then we crumble the salt in. Salt's important to give flavor, to drive out moisture, and for microbiological safety as well. And then the cheese is pressed to drive out any extra whey, because if the whey remains, the starch is going to remain and it's going to get too acid. And then it goes into the ripening room, it's waxed, and the cheese is kept for at least 2 months. And then it's ready to come out to you guys again. The next section of our evening is going to be more about the history of Einkorn. So we're still looking back and having a lot of respect for the past, which is why I really felt I had to make this cheese. And it's going to be Michael that's going to be telling you about the history of Einkorn Flour.
So we just need to unmute there, Michael. You may be trying to look for that. You're currently on mute. Perfect.
Okay. Good evening. Okay, good evening, everybody. And I'm going to tell you a little bit more about Einkorn, history and growing of it. And I'm just going to start the slideshow. Okay, I want to go back. Could you go there? Okay, we finally got there. So I think Einkorn was the catalyst of civilization, because it is the original wheat, probably the original human crop, which humans first grew. It was first cultivated about 14,000 years ago. See here on the timeline, which gives all the different histories of wheat. The Einkorn started about, wild Einkorn started first and then cultivated Einkorn. But you can see the timeline is pretty well for scale. And you'll see that most of it is really before the time of Christ or the Roman Empire. And so the modern wheat, which you'll see down at the right-hand corner, the red bar, is really very modern and only has just arrived on the scene. So Einkorn was first cultivated about 14,000 years, Neolithic period, so Stone Age times. As the last ice age retreated, we as humans, as hunter-gatherers, slowly moved north, and following the retreat of the ice. And it developed very slowly, the farming, as hunter-gatherers became less migratory, and they stayed often in the same region for the whole season. And they would settle in an area, and they'd gather wild food, and then they discovered that planting seeds produced crops. And rather than gather crops, they then would be planting crops. This mainly happened in an area called the Fertile Crescent in in Turkey and Iraq. And there's much evidence from that place of growing of einkorn. As humans migrated, they took this ancient wheat with them when they would travel. And so it spread all over Europe and the Near East. It reached England in about 4000 BC. And then it was grown mainly on the chalk downs in England and in clearings in the woods. It's been found quite close to here, only about, as I said in the film, about 8 miles away at the Danebury Hill Fort. And that's 4,000 years ago, so similar time to Stonehenge. Farming allowed us a settled existence. It grew, out of it grew new lifestyles. And that allowed the development of things like writing, metallurgy, so hence the Bronze Age arrived, and urbanization, so towns and villages sprang up. So because of this crop and other crops which came along, we became able to do all these other things. This is a film, a slide of the genealogy of all wheat. At the top right-hand corner, you can see where the cursor is, einkorn. It then crossed with another grass, became emmer down here, and then it crossed again with another grass and became modern wheat, which is all these types of modern wheat. Red wheat is the one we all, 99% is red wheat. And so that is modern wheat. Modern wheat has 42 chromosomes, humans have 46. So we're not much better than wheat, really. Einkorn is quite low in gluten, and so it's quite a different way to bake, which Claire will be explaining later. It is a husked wheat, as the film described, and you can see in the picture that the husked side, the left-hand side of the picture, is grain as it comes off the combine. It then has to be dehulled to form the naked grain, which then can be eaten either boiled. You can boil and eat it as rice, like rice. Much better flavor and much better nutrition than rice, mind you. Or milled into flour. The grain is smaller and lower in yield than wheats which came after it. So when emmer and later spelt came along, it reduced in area, but continued to grow in the original areas. In the last 25 years, it's been revived and is now grown in many countries of the world for specialist customers. Okay, that's all I have to talk on that at the moment. And I will hand you back to Shane.
Hello there, Michael. So if you could stop screen sharing, that would be helpful, if you're able to do that. Perfect.
Back, sorry.
That's okay. And I believe the next person, we're going back to Kerry for her next one. For
the finale, yeah, the one you've been waiting for. Now, for this cheese, poor Claire and Michael marriage ordered last, and they haven't got any of this cheese because I'd run out. And for all the rest of you have all got the Avery cheese, and I ran out so much that this one that I'm tasting is not even right. So the one that you guys have is going to be much more oozy and much more unctuous, but the one I've got is going to be quite fresh and sharp and a little bit different to yours. So you'll be able to see how it changes. I do apologize for the rustling in the background. One piece of Zoom advice I was given was to chain up the children before you started. And the noise in the background is my 12-year-old rustling around with shopping. So I'm going to ask him to pause for 5 minutes. Bede, Chad. I was my noisy husband as well. Yeah, they're not watching me. They don't care. Right, but I am worth watching. So let's continue. So during this period, this COVID period, it's been a crazy time and lots of changes has been happening. One cheese I've always wanted to make, and I've been trying so hard, it was really missing from my range. I had a hard cheese, I had 2 blue cheeses, I had a soft fresh cheese, but the cheese that was missing to complete our cheese board was a soft, white, oozy cheese. We needed a brie or a camembert. Now this year, a really good friend of mine, the person who I consider to be the best cheesemaker in the world, Pete Humphreys, he has won the accolade, his cheeses have won the accolade of best cheese at the World Cheese Awards. So I do consider him to be the best cheesemaker in the world. And this year, he had the free time. I didn't. I was so busy with delivering lots of extra milk, but he had the free time to take time out to teach me how to make a soft white cheese. Now, I thought it would be so tricky because we make a blue cheese, and I've already discussed with you about each of the cheeses I've shown you. You've seen how the other molds that are in the environment of our ripening rooms are influencing the surface of the cheeses. So I was worried that this was going to end up as a blue cheese as well. But Peter Humphreys, who came from White Lake Cheese, showed me how to make a lovely soft white cheese. I can't see all of you, but I can see Shane Holland making wonderful motions as he's tasting this cheese. It's really exciting and ever so rewarding to see. I love selling our produce at the farmers markets, where I get to talk to the customers and get their reactions and their feedback and suggestions as well. They give me notes on how to improve. So to make a soft cheese, you do less handling of the curd than you do for the other cheeses. We have the milk, again, using it fresh from the morning milking from the cows, pasteurize it, add in a starter culture, but we also add in other cultures as well. So the starter culture is turning the lactose into lactic acid. We also add Geotrichum candidum to give this white, fluffy mold. And it can give a little bit of a wrinkly rind sometimes as well. And we put that mold in at the start. Then we add in the rennet, we cut the curd, we stir it, and then we put it into the molds. We do salting in a different way from the other cheeses. Instead of crumbling the salt throughout the whole mixture of the curds, we brine the cheeses. And these little cheeses, the day after they've been made, go into the brine bath, into a salty bath, and then they're taken out. They get turned every week, sometimes twice a week. We have to judge how it's going. When I looked at this cheese today, I can see it's got a lovely white top, but when I look at the bottom, I can see it's got a bit of a dented bottom. So this one needed turning a day earlier than it should have got, than it did get turned. And then it will take about 3 weeks for this cheese to ripen. And I think soft cheeses has been the real challenge this year because they've got a fairly short ripening time, but they also have a short shelf life as well. So with the hard cheeses, if I have cancelled orders of the hard cheeses, that's fine. I can just keep ripening that cheese extra long. But when we've had the lockdowns, meaning that restaurants and pubs and shops have been closed, and cancel orders for this sort of cheese, I've ended up with lots of really, really oozy cheeses, and my chickens have eaten very, very well. But it's a shame that not all of it ends up for human consumption in these times. So let's have a look at this cheese. So we've been talking about the rind. It's quite a white, simple rind there. And you can see that it starts to ripen. It starts to get more oozy from the edge coming inwards. And then it's got kind of chalky towards the center. Yours will be less chalky than mine because yours has been matured for longer. And I'm nearly, oh, that's lovely. Thank you, Shane. Shane says it's sublime, citrus, butter, bitter, artichoke on the finish. Lovely. Yeah, I love this cheese. I'm so happy we've made it. I've really enjoyed chatting to you guys. And I could, of course, do it for the full hour, but I've got to be generous and share my time. And next I'm going to share this time with Claire, who's going to talk to us about baking with Einkorn. I made a vegan recipe actually with coconut and banana bread with the Einkorn flour, but I'm really looking forward to seeing what you guys have all been baking with your Einkorn. Thank you. So Claire, if you do the unmuting thing again.
Sorry, I started the show without unmuting myself. Now I'm going back in. So just a few things to chat about with regards to Einkorn flour. And I'll show you some grain in a second, but we're going to just quickly have a few words around the Einkorn flour, which I know many of you tried baking with. And you're going to tell me later how you've got on, because it does behave quite differently to modern wheat. We have taken off the outer husk, but when you buy a bag of Einkorn flour, it is still wholemeal flour. And so it's most suited to wholemeal type recipes. But although you can make delicious bread with it, very tasty bread, it behaves rather differently, and it's not going to rise in the same way because it has a very delicate gluten. And I don't know what bread recipes you will have tried, but if you followed one of our recipes, you will have found that there's very little kneading in these recipes because Einkorn doesn't perform in the same way as wheat flour when it's made into bread. And something happens to the flour. If you knead it, syneresis takes place, which is when the wheat dough, the dough will shed water, and the syneresis makes the dough very sticky. The same thing happens with bread made with rye flour. I'm sure you've all had that experience of kneading your rye flour and it suddenly gets rather sticky. Well, the same will happen with Einkorn. So many of the bread recipes are quick type of bread recipe where no kneading is involved. That's great if you don't like kneading, and you can actually make some really tasty breads. And there's a few pictures coming I'm going to show you now. So this change in the gluten is something you just work with. It doesn't rise, it's not high and fluffy, but what you sacrifice in size and volume of the loaf is made up by very tasty, earthy, deep, rustic notes in the things that you bake. And I've made some of these to show you in a second. So the one on the left of the screen here is Einkorn. It's actually made in a bread machine. And I have to say, you can't make in a bread machine a loaf that looks quite like that. So it has got a little bit of white flour in it, but that just helps to give it structure because it doesn't have a lot of gluten. And as I've already said, too much kneading is not good for it. So in a bread machine, you really want to use some strong white flour as well as the Einkorn flour. And here's a fruited bread. You can make cakes with Einkorn flour. Softness of the grain is particularly suited to cake making, and indeed biscuits. And I just want to come back to the screen, come back to seeing me. How do I do that?
We can now see, we can see you.
You can now see me. And I'm just going to show you, well, I've just shown you some photographs of ones I made earlier, but these are the ones I made today. But just before I show you those, I just want to actually just hold up again and show you, this is some of the Einkorn that I saved at harvest time. And I want to try and show you how small and thin Einkorn is. And in actual fact, if you've planted that, you have to have an awful lot of those tiny, tiny seed heads to get much food value out of them, which is one reason why, sadly, it fell out of common practice to grow it, because the food that you could achieve was very little. But it had this wonderful flavour and is great eaten as a grain. Somebody asked that earlier. So bread, I also quite fond of these. These are flatbreads. We also make quite a few of these Einkorn, pull this up, snack biscuits. So I've stopped buying those things that come in bags that you sometimes have before supper, those with savoury, crunchy things. And so I make these so easy to make. It just rolls out and you cut it into squares and things. And so I always have a box of those in the cupboard to eat in the evening. And these recipes are all on the Doves Farm Foods website if you want to follow them. But in a second now, I'd quite like to find out what people have been baking. And I think through some magic, Shane is going to be able to invite you all to show if you wish, and even say a few words should you wish to talk about Einkorn, not just in the chat box, although I can see some people making some helpful comments there. But it is probably the moment we can all do a show and tell by holding up what we've made. Can we do that, Jane?
We can do it individually. So if anyone wants to show us what they've made, just put your say hello in the chat box, and then I will invite you to show your camera, and you can show us all what you've made. So if anyone wants to do that, would be fantastic. I'm not going to show you what I made because I'm nowhere near as good a baker as Claire. I'm reasonably good at eating cheese. My baking was not so successful, so I'm too embarrassed to show that. But I'd love to see what you've made. So Christine is wanting to show. So let's do that. So Christine, if you want to put your camera on or unmute.
Techno. Okay. No,
We can hear you. We can't see you.
can't see me. Oh. Just a minute. Where is it? The bottom or the top?
Is it at the bottom left? Is where it?
Yes, it'll be at the bottom left.
And there'll be an option for start video in the bottom left, just across from the mute.
We don't have the choice.
Oh. What is no choice? Oh.
You got a camera?
It's Microsoft versus Apple.
Okay.
Sorry,
Give your words.
I
Christine, as well.
photograph and send them to you.
We'll send you a tape recording of the sound.
We've made a pizza with the Einkorn this evening, so we'll send you a photograph of that as well.
Perfect. Nicola Tippler wanted to show, so I've just promoted her. So if she wants to switch on her cam and unmute, maybe we can do that.
Yeah.
Are you able to switch your camera on, Nicola?
There we are.
There we are. We can see you.
Hey. Hi, Michael. Right, savoury biscuits. They're absolutely lovely with the cheese. I mixed a few oats together with the Einkorn flour. Recommended.
Right. I have a quick word with Michael and Claire, please. The flour ranges that you sell at shops, I'm really pleased with the colour coordination you've produced. Because as a shelf stacker at an organic food shop, it's dead easy. I don't have to read the labels now because they're colour coded. Half the time now to stack shelves. Great. Keep it up.
And
Thank you very much for that.
we also have Carl, who also wanted to show, I believe, his biscuits. So Carl, if you'd like to unmute yourself and switch your video on, and we'll be able to see you. We can see you. Wonderful.
Very similar to the biscuits which the lady showed us just now. They're Einkorn, using the Dove's recipe on their website, and it works a treat. Very easy. Little triangular jobs. Delicious.
Would anyone else like to show what they've made? If you'd like to show, just tell me you'd like to do so. Otherwise, otherwise, it'd be great to take some questions for Claire, for Michael, or for Kerry.
I think we have already got some that we could answer in the. Can you hear me, Shane?
Yes, I can hear you. Yeah.
There are some questions in the chat. There's one certainly around recipes you can find on the Dove's Farm website, the pizza one, but there was one further back about grain. Where was it? Sorry, there was one you were going to answer, Michael.
Yeah.
So in the meanwhile, well, I'll have to look for it because there's actually so many comments I can't see that. But I
There
can
was
start.
a back here that said, I like the idea of eating just the grain as it is. Is it easy to buy?
Not. We don't sell the grain currently as a grain for people to boil, but it's something we'll need to look at. Yes, we do. We used to sell pearl barley, and we could do a similar thing by roughing up the bran on the grain, letting the water in, so it'll soften. But we could do it, yeah, but not at the moment.
And there's another question, I think this is from Frida. Apart from the gluten level, what's the fundamental difference between these grains?
The fundamental difference is that they're like different varieties of apple. You can get many different varieties of apple, and they're all slightly genetically different, and they have different characteristics. And so Einkorn has quite a nutty flavour. It's quite high in bran, but it needs delicate handling because it's lower in gluten. Whereas the next generation after Einkorn was Emma, which is actually my favourite flour, because I think it's got almost as good a taste as Einkorn, and it has quite a lot of gluten in it. That is a really fantastic flour, the Emma. And then after that came Spelt, and many of you have tried Spelt. It's slightly lighter flour, not so robust. And then after that came modern wheat. I did see somebody had a note that they'd bought some Kamut or Khorasan flour. That is a very old type of flour, a very old type of grain, possibly the grain that the Persians and the Egyptian dynasties would have baked around about that time. It's a brilliant for pasta. Kamut flour is absolutely brilliant pasta flour.
There's another question for you here. Where did you get the seed from to be able to reintroduce the crop?
We were very early in introducing these crops. They are, and we got it from a research laboratory in Eastern Europe. We'd met this researcher at various wheat conferences I'd been to, and got to know him, and obviously chatting around. He had some Einkorn and Emma in this research station. This is in the early 2000s, and we got about 25 kilos of it. No, maybe less than that. Maybe it's 10 kilos. We had to grow it on the farm. We grew it for 4 years, multiplying it up, and before we had enough to actually give to. We grew on the farm, and we gave to other growers. Which one is on this call? Gerald Osborne, who grows for us. We had enough to give to our farmers, and then they grew enough that we had enough to mill.
Fantastic.
So it took about 4 to 5 years.
Fantastic. We've got a question for Kerry actually as well. Kerry, how best can we store your cheeses?
Oh, well, in your cheese cellar, of course. But if you don't have a cheese cellar, now, when the cheeses come to you, the rind protects the cheese. So if you've still got the cheese as a whole cheese, that's the best way to store the cheese. And once you've cut it open, eat the whole cheese. But you might not want to eat the whole cheese. And your job as the owner of the cheese is to protect this cut surface. This rind does the job of protecting the cheese, so you don't need to worry about that. But this is the bit that you need to protect. You need to stop that from drying out. You need to stop this part from getting molds growing on it. So get some waxed paper and put that tightly against this surface. If it goes against this surface, that's fine as well. But if it's not on there, that's fine. The cheese can continue to breathe. It is a living, changing thing. It will like to be in not really cold, so not the coldest part of the fridge. And, you know, fridges are a little bit too warm for cheeses, but, you know, in the fridge is great. And if you put them, once they're wrapped, into either a bag, a loose bag, or into a Tupperware box, then that means you've got a nice humid atmosphere that's going to help keep it moist and humid so it doesn't dry out. Now, it's important not to just seal that box, because then you're creating an anaerobic environment. So you need to keep opening, if it is in a Tupperware box, keep opening that and peeping inside and having a little nibble, so that you're letting the air exchange. And then if it does start to get moldy, if it does start to dry out, don't you dare throw it out. The cows have worked surely hard to make that cheese, and we have to got the milk out of that cheese. The hours that we've put into stirring that curd and turning these cheeses, you can use it for cooking. If you think you're not going to get through cheese, quite hard cheeses, that you could grate them and freeze them, but you know, with the softer cheeses, you can easily cook with cheese. They'll make most recipes just that little bit more special. I have so much cheese in my dairy, and not quite often, but not very much in my own fridge. And I'm sad about that, because they will improve every recipe you have. So chuck a little bit in your recipe. Or if you think you have too much cheese, pass it on to your neighbours. And if you really, really can't manage to eat it, and you obviously can't have many dinner parties at the moment to get through it, and you can't give it to your friends, then give it to your chickens or give it to your pigs.
I think I want to be your neighbour, Kerry. We are coming up to time, just past time anyway, but we still have a couple of questions for Claire and for Michael, both of them. One is Einkorn still as nutritious as it was thousands of years ago? So I guess, is the current strain pretty much the same? And the other question related, I guess, is how hardy is Einkorn?
Okay. Einkorn is still is nutritious. I think it's a job to know exactly, but certainly recently they did find remnants of Einkorn bread in an archaeological site in Jordan dating back to 14,000 years ago, and they have looked at it, and they thought that the composition of it, although it was deteriorated 14,000 years, was very similar to the modern wheat. And because it hasn't been played around with by plant breeders, then we assume that the nutrition is very similar to as it was many years ago. And how hardy is Einkorn? Einkorn obviously grew up, as I said, in the Middle East. It was grown as a spring crop, very warm conditions, and so it was grown as a spring crop there. So it doesn't really like the winter an awful lot, but it is very hardy against disease and pests. And it grows very tall. It has a lovely thin straw, but it does grow quite tall. But I would say it is a hardy crop, yes, but not for weather, not for winter.
Fantastic. And that brings us to the end of our evening, pretty much. I hand back to Claire.
So I want to say, well, thank you to everybody for coming along. This is Slow Food Berkshire and Wiltshire, and as I'm sure you're all aware, we occupy quite a sizable chunk in the middle of England here, and historically a very rural area, and it's really great that we still have farmers producing farmhouse products. So many farmers near the urban areas, of course, have planted trees in their farms rather than carrying on with these agricultural traditions. But we do have a lot of farmer members in our particular slow food group. So if you'd like to find out more, please find out more about slow food in general and the many activities that slow food is involved in, many projects across the world. Please visit slowfood.org.uk. And if you have a moment to post something on Facebook, please tag us at Slow Food, tag us at Slow Food Berkshire Wiltshire. And big thanks to Shane for the technological work this evening. Thank you. Thank you to Kerry. Thank you, Michael.
I really liked how this was a coming together of the chalk downs, where the flour is grown, and the cheese making region, the North and the South Wiltshire coming together.
Very good.
Very good. And thank you everybody for coming along. Your comments have been great. I haven't managed to catch up with all of them, but really great. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. And before everyone goes, I think, because it's always impossible to thank oneself, but actually we have Claire and Michael who do so much, not just for slow food, but for quality food, full stop. And we have three heroes with us this evening. you know, artisan producers, it is much, much easier, and you make much more profit farming and producing food in a bulk industrial way. And we have 3 people here who exemplify to me what food should be about, and that's quality food. It's about tradition, it's about landscape. We have 3 heroes here. Please buy their products and you know, enjoy them. You know, enjoy the cheese, enjoy these ancient grains. There aren't that many people making food in this way. And the way that we ensure that these things continue is by buying these. So as I say, please buy them and buy food made in a similar way by similar people. If we don't do that, then we lose it forever. Thank you very much to Claire, to Michael, and to Kerry.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And good night, everyone. And as I say, if you would like to watch this again, maybe you've got some leftover cheese and you want to share it with some neighbours at the weekend, and go through the tutorial or have another go at baking and show that to some friends. This will likely be online on about Saturday. If you go to YouTube and search for Terra Madre Fringe, there are about 50 different videos there now. On all kinds of different topics. You can watch the Dove's Farm video. There's some cheese tasting videos, so have a look at those as well. Whatever you're doing for the rest of the evening, enjoy it, and good night. Good night now.
Night.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank
Happy
you.
birthday, Hazel.